Yeah, so thank you very much, Jan. So from my perspective today, I wish to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy diaries to join yet again, which is one of our monthly sessions, obviously of our blended story, which, we want to obviously create a community of sharing and giving those sort of wells of wisdom, obviously, to everyone that's in our community. And obviously really focusing really today around the diagnostics as training needs analysis. And today that happened, obviously we got two worldly renowned guest speakers. So obviously I'd like them to perhaps introduce themselves in a second. But for me, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for taking the time out today of your time.
Paul, where are you today?
Yep, so I'm actually enjoying the hospitality of Trinity College Dublin. We've been one of the speakers at the Future of Education as a world conference, and we've actually really enjoyed the hospitality of everybody at the college. So that's where I'm speaking from today, in one of the halls of the college. So if there are some background noise, I do apologise, but that's where I'm situated today, and yeah, I welcome everyone to our bigger and wider community.
I don't know if this is a coincidence. I saw the people that registered for this event or a list, and amazing. I found there were about 13 or 14 people that registered were actually also from Ireland. So this cannot be a coincidence. With regards to diagnostics as training needs analysis, that's the topic for today. And we have two very well-known speakers indeed, Vlatka Hlupic, who is a professor and will be asked to introduce herself in 1 minute, and also Nigel Gracie from Harrison Assessments, has huge amount of experience in this field, and not just in the UK. With regards to the topic, why did we think of this topic? Why did this come up? In many cases, training providers receive a training needs analysis from their customer and then are asked to design a course around that. However, we feel that if you as a training provider have access or use diagnostics yourself, you have better information, you have more information, you are more in control for the training needs analysis, and you can provide a better service also to be a trusted advisor to your customer. So that topic in the background, that was the angle we thought of, but we also want to hear other voices. And as Paul said it already, please put your ideas in the chat, not just to ask questions, but also as a discussion. So that's what brought this all on. Vlatka, can I ask to start with you, and maybe can you introduce what is your field, what is your experience in this field of diagnostics?
Good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks, Jan, for inviting me to join this webinar. Well, I have about 30 years of professional experience in terms of individual and organizational transformation. As you mentioned, I'm professor at the business school, but I'm also CEO and founder of Management Shift Solutions Limited. And we use our assessments to help individual leaders and organizations to transform. So I developed many assessments in my career, but the two main ones I could perhaps mention today are first the individual assessment for leaders, showing the 5 level of their mindset, and we can use those results from those individual assessments for coaching. And I will very briefly describe 5 levels, because the main assessment for training needs analysis I want to talk to you about is based on research around these 5 levels, which is the essence of the management shift approach. So at level 1, where we have different mindsets and different type of organizational culture at every level, and every level is characterized by specific thinking patterns, language use, emotions, behavior, leadership style, and organizational outcomes. So level 1, we have a very lifeless mindset, apathetic culture, not much gets done. It's a toxic culture, lots of fear and worry and so on. Level 2, reluctant mindset and stagnating culture. People do a minimum they can get away with just to get a paycheck. And then level 3, or controlled mindset, orderly culture. It's traditional command and control. People do what they're told to do. They're micromanaged. So levels 1, 2, 3, this is where majority of organizations are today. And that's why we see various issues with engagement, performance, and so on. So the management shift is about helping organizations and individuals to shift from level 3 to level 4. At level 4, we have enthusiastic mindset and collaborative culture, and keywords are trust, transparency, purpose, collaboration, giving back to the society, working on something bigger than ourselves. And occasionally we can reach level 5 with limitless mindset and unbounded culture, where highly innovative teams work day and night on some amazing innovations. So the first assessment is about individual assessment for leaders, seeing where they are. And all our work is about helping leaders and organizations to shift from level 3 to level 4, because at level 4, we have a step change increase in performance, engagement, innovation, and profit. So after I've been using the individual assessment for a while, I realized I had to figure out how to help entire organization or part of the organization to shift from level 3 to level 4. Then I went back to more research, and I've done a lot of additional research, which is all described in my book, The Management Shift. And I created a model with 6 areas, 6 boxes, and then I created a diagnostic tool. So we have organizational diagnostic tool, the 6-box leadership diagnostics, 120 questions, and we can measure hidden strengths and weaknesses in the 6 areas. The first area is culture. So we can see what kind of a culture organization has. Is it more people focused, collaborative, around level 4, or is it more command and control, or even toxic? And then relationships, we can measure how well people work together. And then individuals, we can measure individuals' drive, motivation, skills. And then we have strategy box, where we measure how strategy gets developed and executed. Systems, how the work gets done, and resources. So this is like, I call it organizational MRI. So we see what kind of hidden strengths and weaknesses organization has in those 6 areas. We can measure hundreds or thousands of participants anonymously within 20 minutes or so. And we can use the data for different purposes, one being training needs analysis. And that has been used, for example, in the House of Commons some 10 years ago to design a very specific training for senior civil servants. It has been used in Land Direct, for example, for designing training and so on. So training needs analysis is one outcome of this report. We have 43 pages long reports analyzing the key strengths and weaknesses in those 6 areas. And this is, I can see a question, it's all automated. So we don't do any interviews. The client gets URL link, which gets emailed to hundreds or sometimes thousands of participants. It takes about 20 minutes, and we collect quantitative and qualitative data. So for every questions, we have 120 questions for those 6 areas. We measure on a Likert scale, agreement or disagreement with certain questions, and everything is research-based. So it's being developed and tested on dozens of companies over years.
Okay.
And for every question, we can also write text and see it's all anonymous. And there
Excellent.
are other application areas as well.
Thank you, Vlatka. With regards to the introduction, that was a good introduction, and we all understand the long-term research. This is your life's work, Vlatka. I'm going to go to Nigel, and Nigel, you've been in the sector for quite a few years as well. I'm trying to be polite. What is your experience in assessment and diagnostics, Nigel?
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, so my background, 20 years commercial experience with learning and development, HR type solutions of one sort or other. So training, employee engagement solutions, coaching, 360s, and a big chunk of that has been in psychometrics, which I recently got back into. And so I've worked for some big American companies, the ones you might have heard of, Miller Hyman, who are a big American sales training, got bought by Korn Ferry a couple of years ago. And I worked also for Franklin Covey. If you don't recognize the name, I'm sure you've probably heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the biggest best-selling business book of all time. So I've worked for some big companies, excuse me, initially as an individual contributor, and then latterly in sales leadership. And kind of like what Vlatka was saying about organizational outcomes, you know, when it comes to diagnosis, when it comes to training needs analysis, you know, as individuals, sure, of course, we've all got our own personal areas of development and things we need to work on. I need to work on the fact that I'm 50 next month and I'm not very happy about it. But that, you know, there's the stuff that we need to work on from our personal development. But how do these things relate to organizational outcomes? If you're going to, you know, from a commercial perspective, if you're asking them to spend money with you, how can what our solutions help you achieve whatever it is you're looking to achieve as an organization? And I've had many conversations where people say, for example, we want to do some leadership training. Well, that's great. Why? You know, what's the problem? What's the issue? What's going on? And obviously, as I said, I work for a number of assessment providers at Harrison at the moment. So one of the key things I see is about defining what good looks like. You know, what does the outcome look like at the end, and what are the potential derailers? And that's going to come whether it's a behavioural thing or personality things. What are those potential derailers that are going to get in the way of the training being successful? Because if we're doing training, what we're talking about is sustained behaviour change. How do we make that happen, and what are the things that are going to get in the way? So that's kind of my take on that to
All right.
begin.
Well, I'm sure we'll get to talk about the derailers as a topic within this. But I wanted to start with another question at the moment, which is, if I'm a training provider, and our audience here consists mostly of trainers, training providers, why would they have a diagnostic tool in their portfolio? Why is that relevant for them? So, Nigel, can I start with you this time?
Yeah, I mean, you know, being unapologetically commercial, it's sometimes the client thinks they've got the problem they think they have isn't necessarily the problem they have got. You're not doing them a favor by, you know, trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So helping them understand and using that as a word to help them understand, the classic one being, certainly in the assessment world, being, you know, the company thinks we've got a recruitment problem, and it turns out, no, you don't. You have a retention problem. You're actually getting the right people. You're just not holding on to them, but you don't realize that. So certainly, yeah, helping your clients understand actually what is really going on. What is the actual problem within that business? Because as I said, they don't always understand, don't always know for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. Vlatka, can I give the same question to you? Why should a training provider have a diagnostics tool in their portfolio?
Because it saves a lot of time and resources to use the tool to collect data from many people to see what's really going on, to get a snapshot of truth, so you don't shoot in the dark, so you know where really strengths and weaknesses are, and what the particular client needs, where are their bottlenecks, where are developmental opportunities, so you can really have a focused, a customized design of training programs once you do this training needs analysis. So as I said, with our tool, it can be done in 20 minutes. We can scan hundreds or thousands of people within that time. And if you can imagine how long would it take to interview that same number of people, or even small proportion, and what kind of resources would you need to do that? So it's really about pinpointing the developmental needs that the tool can do, that other methods of data collection would just not be practical in many cases.
Okay, thank you for that. And we touched upon an interesting point there. Nigel, you started with it, and Vlatka, you brought it home there, which is you want to solve your customer's problem. And quite often, a proactive approach is enabled by using a diagnostic. For example, within the 6 box, you can see an entire department or an entire organization's issues that come to light. And also within Harrison, you will be able to do similar things. But quite often you might be asked by a learning and development person, solve this one problem for me, where you can actually uncover through a wider use of the tool set that there are other issues as well. I liked your example, Nigel, of we have a recruitment problem, no, you have a retention problem. And if people don't leave organizations, but managers, when they leave an organization, then that's clearly a training need. So it's things by being proactive that you can solve like that. Are there people in the audience that have similar experiences or that that want to contribute? If you do, just put it in the chat, and we'll bring you on board to ask a question or give your opinion. With regards to training providers using tools such as the diagnostic tools, what do they need to? What does a training provider need to know? What do they be very technical? What kind of background would you say that they need to make a diagnostic tool work for them? Vlatka, would you like to start with that?
I think it's important to really understand what is going on underneath the surface. Sometimes trainers can see the tip of the iceberg, and client may tell them what's going on, and they think what's going on, but what is really going on underneath the tip of the iceberg, this is where trainers need to get the information to see where are those hidden strengths and weaknesses. And then the value of the service that that trainer can provide to client would be much, much greater, addressing the real needs, as Nigel mentioned, because in my experience using this tool with many customers globally, sometimes we produce different reports per managerial level or department or geographical location, and we can see discrepancies, etc. And quite often what managers and leaders think it's going on, it's not close to the truth. So we get a snapshot of truth and see what really are strengths and weaknesses in those different areas, and what really you need to focus when you're training. And quite often it's issue with leadership development as well, because we know that people leave bad bosses more than anything else. In the age of great resignation, I think it's one of the key challenges.
Okay, thank you for that, Vlatka. Nigel, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think from from a practical point of view, and it's going to sound, what I'm going to say is going to sound self-evident, but unfortunately in the assessment world, it happens a lot that people don't understand what the tool is measuring and what the tool does. And like any other tool, if you're trying to hammer a nail into the wall and you're using a screwdriver, it's not going to do a very good job. That assessment world is exactly the same, and it's something I'm really passionate about, is understanding what it does and what it doesn't do. Now, I believe we've got a couple of psychologists on the call, so I'm not a psychologist, but I know lots of psychologists. And I like to think I'm a reasonably well-informed layman, but in the assessment world, there are basically 4 types of psychometric assessment. A personality-based tool, which is to do with why, a behavior-based tool, which is to do with how, a cognitive process-based tool, which is to do with how your brain works, or how quickly your brain works and you think, and a cognitive competence tool, which is how is a measure of how much or little you know on a particular topic. Now, we've all done cognitive competence, because if you've done any sort of exam GCSEs, A levels, degrees, whatever the education system you've done. That's a cognitive competence assessment. Having said that, when most people think about psychometrics, they do think about either personality or a behavior. So yeah, using the, horses for courses and using the right tool for the right situation was appropriate.
I have a question actually, just listening to both of you as well. We get obviously inside of training, we also look at the frequency sometimes when we're looking at assessments. Do you see that there's an ideal time to perhaps do a review to see the change in organizations and individuals? Is there any sort of timeframes that you feel are more pertinent than others to perhaps look at the behavioral change of perhaps individuals, or look at that cognitive or that personality sort of changes? Have you got any sort of prompts really about the frequency when we should actually apply that tool?
It's a really good question, and the honest answer is it depends. So certainly our tool, which is a behavioral based tool, it's we say you don't need to do it, certainly don't need to do it more than once a year, and really 24 months is usually. But of course, if you've deliberately gone in and done some sort of training intervention, or the big life-changing stuff can change your mindset and can change your how you behave and what your priorities are. Bereavement, divorce, kids, Man U getting spanked 7-0, if that's if it bothers you that much. Yeah. I'm not a Liverpool fan, but I did enjoy the score. So yeah,
can I just interrupt you there, Nigel? Because Radina just made a very good point, and the fact is that obviously there's a frequency, and the recipient can actually see that as actually detrimental to them. They could obviously generate anxieties as well. So and obviously the point being is sometimes is it counterproductive as well? So Radina, my apologies if the pronunciation of your first name is incorrect, but could you perhaps elaborate on your question, please, around counterproductivity?
Yes, thank you. And your pronunciation, Paul, is perfect.
Thank you.
So my question was more around negative practices, or anything from your experience that you have seen that definitely doesn't work, particularly in this post-COVID Zoom fatigue environment. I'll be very curious to hear your opinions as to negative practices as well as the good ones.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump. With I'm sure we all heard the expression, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So certainly, again, in the assessment, while people kind of learn a little bit about it, and then use it to to excuse behavior rather than to explain their behavior. And yeah, you can get assessment fatigue. So I think to Vladka's point, with her model, if there's that suspicion and there's that lack of trust, that's probably reflective of the environment that person's existing in. If you're in a high trust environment and people trust what you're doing with the results and the data, whatever sort of data it is, whether it then those are the scenarios where I think you're not going to have those negative connotations if you've got that high trust culture.
But when you talk about this conversation as well, do you see the importance? I mean, I've been in many organizations that they will just, they use the training needs analysis, they will just use it as a blanket sort of evaluation, basically their entire workforce or the training target audience, but never really explain the benefits of doing it. So what it does, it then starts to build anxieties in there as well. So again, from a counterproductive perspective, do you see the importance then of actually explaining the purpose of doing it, but also explaining should we say, how it could be used as a progressive tool? I mean, have you got any examples of that at all? Vlatka and Nigel.
Because I don't deal directly with clients in our business, so I deal with partners. So Vlatka, do you want?
Yes, a couple of points here. I help clients draft email that will go out to everybody who's going to do assessment, because it's important to get the buy-in, not to be another level 3 command and control thing. It's another thing for you to do, but explaining the broader context and the benefits. And it's also very important, for example, we have various employee engagement tools where employees tick the boxes, they share opinion, but nothing happens afterwards. So
yeah.
I designed the tool with the process that follows up the tool, where people can participate with ideas for change, for improvement, and development of training. And when people are part of the process, they're much more engaged. So it's much more successful in terms of implementation.
Mm-hmm.
One issue is what might be counterproductive. Sometimes you may overanalyze. So, for example, if there are tens of thousands of people in an organization, we would use representative sample, random sampling, so that we don't spend too much time going through assessment, but just to get enough data for informed decision. Mm-hmm. And a final point, I'd just like to answer Peter's question. So with my clients, I use 3 types of tools. First one is individual assessment, which is for behavioral change, but it measures the level of mindset or consciousness. I also developed the Management Shift 360 tool for leadership development, but the main tool for training needs analysis, culture change, engagement, due diligence, risk management, etc. We use the 6-box leadership diagnostic tool, and they are all available to our clients. And if you want more information, you can get more information from Jan and Paul as well, because they're our business partners as well. For
good. John, you posed a question about tools. So, John, just before we go, did that answer your question about tools specifically for teams, John?
To an extent.
Okay. Please expand.
So I think the challenge with all of this, whether it's consulting or coaching, is that you're getting an accurate line in the sand. On an individual basis, this can be quite easy. When you bring in the collective of a team, especially if you've got people in different countries and operating in different cultures, that for me is always a challenge, especially with larger global organizations. So I don't know, does that add more context to it for you?
That's a great question on its own. Let's actually ask the panel what their views are on that. Different cultures and different countries, then you talk about language, and like people might fill in an assessment that is not in their first language, in their mother tongue. How does it affect assessment? Vlatka, can I start with you?
Yes, in terms of the teams, we use the 6-box leadership diagnostic for teams as well. So I use it, for example, when I work with senior leadership teams, with development programs. For example, I run 3 months development program for leadership teams. We use the 6-box assessment plus individual assessment as well. So it can be used for teams. And then we can expand this assessment to other parts of the organizations as well. And we can see where the discrepancies are, for example, between results obtained for senior leadership team and the rest of the organization. We have also done projects where we would have different reports for different countries or different divisions, where you can see the cultural discrepancies as well. Or, for example, mergers and acquisitions. You can scan company A and B, and then you see what problems you get when you try to merge apples and pears, and how do you manage this? So it can be done. In terms of quantifying intangibles, so we capture thoughts from people that are going through assessment in the text box, and then the tool can analyze the keywords. But often when I work with clients, I read all the comments to see what's really going on. So, for example, in one company, one organization, I found out that people go to toilets to cry. So obviously there is a lot of improvement for leadership there. So there are lots of hidden things that we can uncover when we do this diagnostics, and it's all anonymous. So people really offload their soul basically when they go through this, and and say how they really feel and what they really think and what they think should be done to improve things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Nigel, I mean, I know you've got a global audience of over 200 partners around the world. And do you see cultural elements to it, and how do you manage that as well then, especially if you're looking at it from a behaviours perspective in different countries and different cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. That and it's the language as well. You know, I was talking with a partner yesterday in Angola. Well, she's in Angola, but she speaks Portuguese, and so she's operating in her second language. You can't just, you know, any sort of reputable assessment, you can't just stick it through Google Translate. You know, it has to be done properly and translated properly, and the context and the interpretation. We're also very, very hot on. You should never just get a question, get someone to do the questionnaire and send them a report and say, have a read. If you've got any questions, come back to me. Certainly not with our tool. And now there are tools out there you can kind of get away with that. But we would suggest that if you're using one of the more sophisticated end of the market, which we like to think we sit in, it's a starting point for the conversation. It's a kicking off point. It's, you know, of the feedback session and the context of where we're going to use that information. So those cultural norms, those language things, that's what's going to come out in the conversation.
Yeah, at one point I was obviously looking at the future of education, and this question come up, and what it was the first opportunity that an employee was actually asked a question as well. So the fact that the assessment had been created, but the way that it was conducted, it was the first opportunity where people were actually talking and actually had questions, and they could have a positive exchange as well, rather than just seeing it as a blanket wall operating. So it's about the power of assessment, but also about the behaviors of how you can actually change a culture that could be very much standoffish and, well, not for me, but having then that opportunity to engage, ask questions, and that self-evaluation in some respects. Yeah. Actually, well, no, there's another traits, and you know what my traits are like as well. But anyway, so that's really useful. Niall, you had a question as well in the text. Would you like to bring it to life a little bit? Sorry, I can't actually hear you, so my apologies. I think he's still on mute.
We're going to wait for Nigel to come on board. Otherwise, I'd like to also bring in Peter Pease. You asked a question earlier, but you use diagnostics quite a lot. Is there a particular use that you see in training needs analysis for that?
Hi there. Just yeah, I'm here. I'm the reason I haven't got my camera on is I'm here with a kind of group of other people who are kind of in training and development. So yeah, I was just kind of interested in what tools you obviously Harrison assessments I'm kind of aware with, and I think maybe slightly as well, kind of coming back to I see Niall's there now, sort of thinking a little bit about Niall's question is kind of or some of the other questions is kind of how you quantify changes. So you kind of might do your baseline measure of, say, personality, which is fairly fixed. But then how do you kind of capture changes that take place within you know, after you've kind of done training interventions if you're a training provider?
I mean, certainly one of the ways that we can do it, I can hear myself echoing, is, and Vlatka mentioned it a moment again about employee engagement. So we've actually got, you know, on our platform. So if you've done some sort of training intervention, you can actually see the impact or not it's having on the engagement of the team. So if you've done, you know, the classic one, if you've done some leadership development with the leaders, we can look at the team and see in those key areas that we've trained them in, actually, are the team more, we call it fulfillment rather than engagement, but are they more fulfilled? Is the manager putting into practice what they've learned on whatever training process you've used? Because that's always the biggest challenge. It's what they do when they walk out of the training room or when they log off the Zoom training, actually putting it into practice. So yeah, so certainly one way we can do it is actually you measure the impact on the people, on the recipients of whatever the training is, the people it's impacting.
But what we do, we sometimes, it really depends on the scope of the project, is we measure before and after intervention. So in the individual case, we would do individual assessment, then there will be some coaching session done with one of our coaches, and then we will measure again and see the changes in numbers. At organizational level, we can do 6-box scan, do intervention, whether it's training or consultancy intervention with action planning. And then we can rescan organization within 12, 18 months and see how scores are moving hopefully towards level 4, occasionally level 5, as opposed to scores that were there before. So we can see with the numbers and the feedback as well.
Yeah, brilliant.
Could I just follow up? Sorry, I'm sorry. Just follow up on that. I guess for a lot of training providers, the holy grail is around ROI. You know, we're going in. So do these assessments kind of help with and link to kind of getting an ROI financial measure for organisations?
Vlatka, would you like to start with that?
Okay, they do. As I said, we can scan before and after intervention, whether it's training or coaching or consulting assignment that we do. But also we have developed a feedback questionnaires and with various questions that we try to capture feedback 3 months after the program or 6 months after the program, just to capture whether objectives were achieved, what has changed, or would they recommend the program to others. It's the standard questions for feedback questionnaire. So that can also capture ROI as well.
Actually, I like that part, Vlatka, because the element of testing and measuring more than just a happy sheet on the day from a training perspective and a longer term training impact measurement, I think is really powerful and also gives more feedback for the training provider. Sorry, Nigel, for interrupting you.
Yeah, that's okay. No, I was going to add, and Peter, you're right, it is the holy grail because it is hard to do. And even, in a previous job, I've been trained in the Kirkpatrick model. One of the challenges, and I suspect you've probably found this, is the client measuring the things themselves that you need to relate, that they got the data as well, so you can correlate between, well, this is what was happened pre, this is what's happened post, and this is the impact, so yeah, it's absolutely the holy grail, and it is hard, but if you can do it, and again, this massively putting my commercial hat on, if you can do it well and invest the time to do it properly, it's great, because suddenly it means justifying the spend, and sometimes you have to do it, particularly when times are tough. The two budgets that in my experience always get cut first are marketing and learning and development, because the cost always comes up front and the benefit always happens later. So they're always the budgets, and obviously with what's going on in the world at the moment, challenging times all round. So yeah, so please, Peter, if you invent something that does it very straightforward, come and let me know, and I'll sell it for you.
Perfect stuff. So Niall, I appreciate you may be live again. I didn't know if you wanted to contribute. I've seen your text, so if you want to come back through now.
Unfortunately, I've got.
I understand that we have an echoing problem. We are running out of time, I'm afraid. Ash, I also saw your question in the chat. Is there an opportunity to take a 1 minute to elaborate on that question and for the panel to answer that?
Yeah, I think some of the other participants kind of I think they got a consensus what I was trying to get across about the changes that can happen within the workplace. When I was talking about bereavement, sometimes I know it's quite an extreme situation, but if you've got like a big trauma that can happen, and that can impact several employees, that obviously impacts their behaviour, and then how they fill out an assessment might differ as to an organisation or 6 months prior where trauma didn't happen. So for an organisation, how do you tell from the assessment whether is it an external event that's happened, or is it actually like a cultural problem? I know it's a bit of a vague question, but I think it's kind of already been answered slightly, but if not, let me know.
Vlatka, would you like to very shortly respond to that first?
Yes, normally in our questionnaire, we ask people to respond on a typical day, normally over a longer period of time, how do they feel about X, Y, Z, and try to put away any special circumstances that might be going on for them at that particular time.
Nigel?
Yeah, pretty similar, but the reality is it can and does have an effect. That's back to my earlier point on the importance of having the feedback and the conversation with that. You know, if they're challenging what the assessment is saying, then that's the importance of saying, well, okay, well, why do you think, is there anything going on? So yeah, you know, the short answer is you ask them.
Very good. All right. Thank you so much for that. I want to finish this session with a quick overview of what is the, sorry, I'll just share my screen and hopefully everybody can see this. What is the next topics coming up. So what you'll see here is, everybody can hopefully see the screen, the blended stories. What are we doing next? Today is diagnostics. The next one is on the 21st of March, social selling for training providers. And there are, every month, there are new sessions coming. Today, I want to thank everybody, Vlatka, Nigel, and Paul from Ireland, for the contributions, and everybody in this audience as well.